Good morning, this is Keith Brown. I'm going to make a video here showing you how to make a 10-gallon 48-quart square mash tun. We're going to be using certain items. I'm going to point them out as we go along, and I'll be showing you a list later on in the video. First of all, you're going to need to buy you a cooler. This is a Coleman 48-quart 10-gallon cooler. You can use Igloo, you can use Rubbermaid. They need to have an outlet on the side, on the bottom, so that's the main thing. So pick out whichever one you like, get you a good price on them. Other things you're going to need is some 1/2-inch copper rigid tubing. You're going to need around 40 inches, so you can pick that up at your local Lowe's. What we're going to do, you're going to have to cut this into pieces. The sizes you'll need to do is you'll need to cut two 10.5-inch pieces, one 4.25-inch piece, two 1 13/16-inch piece. Also, you'll need some fittings. You'll need 4 of these 90s. 1/2-inch 90s. You'll need one 1/2-inch T. You'll need one reducer. The reducer's from 1/2-inch to 3/8. And you'll need approximately 1.5 foot of 3/8-inch copper tubing. You'll also need some various compression fittings, a 2.5-inch brass nipple, a 1/2-inch ball valve, a 1/2-inch to 3/8-inch reducer, and a 3/8-inch barb. So you'll be seeing these as we go along. You'll also need a couple of O-rings, and I'm not sure, depending on the cooler, you'll probably need some 3/8-inch brass or cadmium plated washers. Stainless steel if you can get them, but it's not necessary. And we'll get started here shortly on making this mash, guys. We're going to start showing you how to cut some of this 1/2-inch tubing. You'll need some tools. Of course, you'll need some kind of measuring device. I have a tubing cutter here. You can pick these up at Lowe's or borrow them from a friend. If you don't have one, it'd be best. I'm going to show you an example of cutting tubing. We're going to cut one of these 1 13/16-inch pieces. I've cut one previously. What you do is just measure out 1 13/16, mark it, take your tubing cutter, loosen it up a little bit. I've just previously cut one. Line it up with the mark. Tighten it up. Make sure you get it accurate, because at least plus or minus a 32nd of an inch I would suggest, because this needs to be nice and square. Of course, you want it to look good. Once you get it started, it's pretty simple. You just turn it once, tighten it a tad bit, turn it again, tighten it a little more. Just keep on going. Take your time. Don't rush it. Eventually you'll get down to this thing. Cuts through the walls of the tubing. I can feel it right now. It's almost there. And it breaks. Now, the important thing here now, what I do, I take an old knife, you can see, unused. I get rid of that sharp burr out of there. Careful, don't cut yourself. Trim that out of there. Now, each one of these fittings, you need to take some sandpaper and you need to polish the outside edge. Just get that oxide, copper oxide off there to get it nice and shiny, because we're going to be soldering this together later. Okay, that's an example. You need to do that to two 10.5-inch pieces, one 4.25-inch piece, and two 1 13/16-inch pieces. Okay, guys. Okay, now we've cut up our pieces and we've dry fitted our manifold. Take a look at this. This is basically what ours is going to look like. We've cut the pieces up, we've dry fitted them, we've brushed the ends, polished them up to get the oxide off of it. Some of the tools you're going to need. You're going to need a good quality lead-free solder. It's got to be lead-free like they use on your house copper fittings for your water lines. You'll need some flux for the copper fittings. You'll need a propane torch. And that should be about it. What we're going to have to do now is we're going to take this back apart, and we're going to take some of our flux, and we're going to put a little bit of flux around each one of these fittings. Just enough, and that's going to cause the silver solder to adhere where the flux is. It's also going to clean it to give it a good anchor pattern for that. So we're going to go through here. We're going to put the flux on all these fittings. We're going to come back in a minute. We're going to fire up the torch and we're going to show you how to solder this up. Okay, talk to you later. This is the way ours is going to look. It's basically a rectangle with a T in the center of the small side. And we're going to actually end up putting a reducer in here. And we're going to connect the tubing to this and run it out to the wall of the cooler. So it's real important to keep this straight. So I suggest you follow this procedure. This is about my third one of these to do. Dry fit it together after you've put the flux on all the fittings. I extend mine off the workbench, put a pretty good heavy weight on the end of it. I'm going to take my torch and I'm going to heat these things up. These fittings on this end, the 290s and the T. The T needs to be up at a slight angle from horizontal. Okay? And the other twos are just, of course, in parallel with the rest of them. So we're going to crank up my torch here. Okay? Give you a little length of your solder. And you just want to heat this up and sweat in these fittings. Don't get it too hot till it's nice and cherry red, but move the tip around on this. The very end of the blue flame is where the hottest part is. So try to heat up both sides of the fitting that you're soldering together equally. Give it back and forth. You'll hear the flux start to boil and sizzle. Don't let that bother you. Starts to color. The color starts to change slightly, and that's when you can start soldering. And you don't have to put a lot of solder in these joints, guys. A little bit goes a long way because it does not have to be watertight. This is going to be a manifold to filter the grain. So give it a little bit of solder in the joint and move on to the next one. All it takes right there. Just continue doing this on all the joints on one end of this, and then we're going to turn it around and do it on the other. And then we're going to come back and sweat in that 3/8 inch reducer here in a second. So I'm going to stop the filming now, and we'll come back when we finish the solder and show you the end result. Okay, we have completed soldering up the main component piece of the manifold. So we've got a nice flat manifold here with a slightly elevated 3/8 inch reducer coming up to hit our 3/8 inch copper tubing, soft copper tubing. And what we're going to do is, if you can look inside this cooler, here's the outlet from this end. We're going to take that outlet out here shortly. But what we're going to do is, this is going to sit in the bottom, and now we're going to make a piece of copper tubing that's going to come out of here, bend back around, and connect to a compression fitting to go out the bottom of the cooler for our to our valve. Okay, so the next step is to take the 3/8 inch copper tubing and bend it in a kind of an S configuration. Now, what you need is some 3/8 inch copper tubing and a tubing bender. This is the type you need. It's a spring type. I bought this at Lowe's. It comes in a set. You do 1/4 inch, 3/8, 1/2 inch, and 5/8 inch tubing. So we're going to take this piece of pipe, you slide this over it, and you use it to bend it in the direction you want. And what we're going to have to do is come out, around, and back. So you're going to need to make the tightest turn you can, and this keeps this tubing from breaking. Kinking up so close that it won't come off. So what we're going to do, we're going to take this, we're going to make our bend here, we're going to attach it, we'll come back and show you the final connection. We're going to solder from the T to the tubing here in a second. Okay, finished welding and bending the 3/8 inch tubing. As you can see, it comes back kind of like a part of an S, back down, and this part here we've left it long. We'll cut this off once we finish putting the valve and in the bottom of this igloo cooler. This will be sticking in there. So the next thing we're going to do is take the fitting, take this plastic fitting out, and we're going to replace this with a ball valve. So we'll be showing that here directly as we start into the next phase of the project. Talk to you then.